January the 17th, 1943. The wind cut through the frozen landscape like shards of glass. A gray dawn barely illuminated the jagged silhouette of the bunker, half buried in snow and mud. Inside, the walls trembled with the distant rhythm of artillery, the ground vibrating under each thud. Frost clung to rifles, and every breath hung in the air like a ghost. A lone gunner crouched by the embrasure, his eyes scanning the horizon in a slow, practiced sweep. His fingers hovered over the trigger, knuckles white, muscles tense. Outside, the enemy crept closer, shadows among the skeletal trees, the distant crack of rifles growing louder. The bunker was a lifeline, a fragile pocket of resistance in a sea of advancing forces. He had a plan, something he had crafted in the dead hours of the previous night. A 360-degree coverage that could keep the bunker alive, perhaps for hours, perhaps for days. Every angle calculated, every line of fire accounted for, every threat anticipated, and now the moment to test it had come. January 1943 marked a critical juncture on the Eastern Front. The Wehrmacht, stretched thin after months of winter campaigning, was engaged in a desperate defense against the advancing Soviet forces. The Red Army, fresh from their victory at Stalingrad, had begun pressing westward, determined to reclaim territory lost since the early months of Operation Barbarossa. The winter was merciless. Temperatures plunged well below -20 degrees Celsius, ice formed along the edges of rivers, and snowdrifts could swallow a man whole if he strayed too far. Logistics were strained on both sides. Roads were impassable. Vehicles froze, and even basic supplies of ammunition and food were scarce. Amid this brutal theater, scattered outposts served as both observation points and defensive anchors. One such position, a reinforced concrete bunker perched on a slight rise overlooking a narrow valley, had become strategically significant. The valley funneled movement along the main road, a critical supply line that both sides sought to control. Holding this position would delay enemy advances, provide artillery observers a vantage point, and serve as a rallying point for retreating units. The defenders numbered only a fraction of the attacking force. Roughly 24 soldiers occupied the bunker, supported by a single artillery piece and a handful of machine guns. Outside, estimates suggested a battalion of Soviet infantry, reinforced by armored vehicles, was preparing to assault the position. Patrols had reported scouts probing the perimeter for weak points. Morale among the defenders was fragile. Many were young conscripts, some barely 20 years old, facing the unrelenting weight of winter, enemy fire, and isolation. Command had given the bunker its nickname informally among the front lines, the Ice Needle. Its steel-reinforced walls were designed to withstand indirect fire, yet the small footprint meant that every defensive sector had to be covered meticulously. Observers knew that any lapse could allow the enemy to breach the perimeter. Communication. Lines were tenuous, radio signals were intermittent, and runners faced the lethal risk of crossing open ground under machine gun fire. The gunner, a seasoned soldier with prior experience in defensive operations, understood the stakes. He had seen bunkers fall, entire crews wiped out by a single overlooked sector or an unanticipated flanking maneuver. Winter amplified the danger. Snow muffled movements, but it also concealed enemy approaches. Frosted branches obscured lines of sight. A misjudged trajectory could send bullets into the snowbank and waste precious ammunition. Over the preceding nights, the bunker had already faced probing attacks. Small squads testing defenses, artillery shells thudding against reinforced walls, machine gun fire tracing arcs across the frozen fields. Each skirmish revealed vulnerabilities, blind spots near the western embrasure, angles where snowdrifts masked enemy movement, and the threat of indirect fire from elevated positions in the valley. The gunner had watched carefully, mapping every weakness, noting every line of sight and memorizing enemy tactics. Strategically, the bunker's survival was more than a local concern. The valley it overlooked fed directly into the larger network of frontline positions. Losing it could expose the flanks of nearby units, force a retreat across the frozen river, and compromise an entire sector. Conversely, Holding the bunker could delay enemy advances long enough for reinforcements to arrive and stabilize the line. High Command emphasized the psychological impact as well. The stubbornness of a small, well-coordinated defense could boost morale across the front and sow doubt among the attackers. In preparation, the defenders had reinforced internal structures. Sandbags lined embrasures. Spare ammunition was stacked within arm's reach. Rations were rationed to ensure endurance. Yet, despite preparation, anxiety lingered in every corner. Every soldier knew that once the assault began, they would be tested to their limits. And in the center of it all, the gunner worked quietly, reviewing a plan that would allow a single defensive position to cover every approach, maximize firepower, and maintain situational awareness under extreme conditions. The stage was set. The snow-laden valley awaited the advancing force. The bunker, cold and silent, held its breath. Outside, distant silhouettes moved through the mist and frost, unaware that a single man's foresight might determine whether the position would fall or survive. The gunner's mind traced the 360-degree coverage in detail, each arc of fire, each fallback position, each emergency maneuver. Every decision could mean life or death, not just for him, but for every soldier in that steel shell of a fortress. And as the first faint rumble of artillery echoed across the valley, the moment for the plan to prove itself approached. The human dimension of the siege was immediate and unrelenting. Inside the bunker, the soldiers fought not just the enemy, but the cold, hunger, and exhaustion gnawing at their endurance. Faces were pale from frostbite, eyes haunted from sleepless nights filled with the distant thud of artillery. Every footstep in the snow outside sent a ripple of tension through the cramped space. Conversations were whispered. Laughter was absent. The gunner became a focal point for hope, his calm demeanor providing a fragile anchor amid chaos. He moved deliberately, checking positions, adjusting angles, and quietly instructing the younger men on how to respond to sudden threats. In these moments, courage was measured not by grand gestures, but by the endurance to remain vigilant, the restraint to conserve ammunition, and the discipline to trust a carefully prepared plan. Each heartbeat seemed amplified in the still, frozen air. Outside, the enemy moved relentlessly closer, unaware that the human will inside this steel shell would shape the fate of the engagement. Morale, fragile and intangible, proved as critical a weapon as any gun or shell. Tactically, the gunner's 360-degree plan transformed a vulnerable structure into a coordinated defensive system. Each machine gun and rifle was assigned specific sectors, ensuring overlapping fields of fire. Observation points were established. Along the parapets and fallback positions were mapped in case a breach occurred. The plan accounted for snowdrifts, limited visibility, and potential blind spots. Enemy approach vectors were anticipated from multiple directions, and firing sequences were rehearsed silently during the night. Even minor movements were calculated. A single misstep could create gaps in coverage or reveal positions to observers outside. The bunker, while modest in size, functioned as a miniature fortress. Lines of fire intersected in precise patterns, preventing any one sector from being overwhelmed. When artillery shells struck nearby, soldiers knew exactly where to hunker and how to resume firing once the concussion passed. Through meticulous preparation, the gunner ensured that every shot counted and every angle was secured, turning a potentially catastrophic defense into a measured, almost methodical resistance. From a technological standpoint, the siege highlighted both the strengths and limitations of WWII-era weaponry. The defenders relied on a mix of bolt-action rifles, light machine guns, and a single artillery piece capable of indirect fire. Ammunition was finite, requiring judicious use and careful coordination. Each weapon had unique characteristics. The machine guns could provide sustained fire, but were vulnerable to overheating. Rifles offered precision but limited range. The artillery could suppress enemy concentrations, but required careful calculation to avoid friendly casualties. Communication technology was rudimentary. Field telephones with frayed wires, intermittent radio signals, and visual signaling through flags or lights. Yet even within these constraints, the gunner and his men managed to maintain cohesion, using technology not as a crutch, but as a tool, amplifying human skill and tactical foresight. Every mechanism, every round, every angle of fire became part of an interconnected system designed to resist overwhelming odds. Leadership in the bunker was unconventional, yet decisive. While formal command existed, the situation demanded initiative from those best positioned to respond. The gunner assumed this role organically, driven by both experience and necessity. His decisions were swift and calculated: when to concentrate fire, when to reposition, and how to anticipate enemy maneuvers. His authority was grounded in competence, not rank, earning him quiet trust from the others. Small decisions, who covered which angle, how to rotate shifts, when to conserve resources, carried outsized consequences. Leadership was exercised through example, presence, and clarity of thought. Soldiers followed because they understood that survival depended on coordination and discipline, not bravado. Even under extreme stress, his plan allowed each man to understand his purpose, his sector, and his contribution to the survival of the whole. The human chain of command was thus strengthened by clarity, foresight, and respect, ensuring the bunker remained more than a collection of isolated defenders. From the enemy's perspective, the siege posed challenges of its own. The attacking battalion faced unknown terrain, limited visibility, and a well-prepared position in their path. Probing attacks revealed only fragments of the defensive layout. Each frontal assault risked heavy casualties. Flanking maneuvers could be anticipated and countered. The attackers were disciplined, yet they encountered resistance that defied expectations. Morale fluctuated with every failed advance, every sudden barrage of concentrated fire that erupted seemingly from nowhere. For the Red Army units advancing along the valley, the bunker was both a physical and psychological obstacle. It demanded time, attention, and resources, factors that could slow an entire campaign. Ethical and practical dilemmas also emerged. When to commit armored units in icy conditions, how to minimize friendly losses while maintaining pressure, and when to call off assaults without compromising broader strategic objectives. In many ways, the gunner's plan forced the enemy to adapt, to calculate not only against numbers but against ingenuity and foresight, turning the bunker into a focal point of tension for both sides. These 5 perspectives converged in a single, tense reality. Human endurance, tactical precision, technological constraints, emergent leadership, and enemy adaptation all intertwined. Each angle reinforced the others. Morale supported discipline, which maximized the use of technology, which amplified tactical decisions, which in turn challenged the attackers. The bunker's survival was not a product of chance, but of meticulous planning, resilience, and execution. And as the first volleys of concentrated assault approached, each element would be tested simultaneously, pushing men and machines to their limits. By mid-morning, on January 18th, the valley was alive with the sound of approaching boots, engines, and the distant roar of artillery. Snow swirled in the bitter wind, carrying with it the metallic scent of frozen earth and spent gunpowder. The first wave of the enemy appeared on the ridge, shadows moving cautiously between trees and rocks. From inside the bunker, the gunner adjusted his firing lines one final time, checking sectors that could be exploited during the assault. Each man knew his role, each weapon its purpose, and every angle had a backup. At 09:12, the enemy opened fire. Artillery shells splintered nearby trees and sent showers of frozen soil against the bunker walls. The concussion rattled teeth and eardrums alike, but the defenders held their positions, returning fire with disciplined bursts. The gunner's plan activated in real time. Machine guns cut fields of fire across the valley approaches, rifles picked off individual scouts, and the artillery delivered indirect suppression to slow armored advances. Every movement outside was countered with precision, the 360-degree coverage leaving no flank vulnerable. Around 09:45, the enemy attempted a flanking maneuver from the northeast, using snowbanks and drifted mounds as cover. Anticipating this, the gunner had pre-positioned a pair of rifles with interlocking arcs that turned the drifted snow into a killing zone. As the first attackers crested the ridge, concentrated fire erupted, sending soldiers sprawling into the snow. Communications inside the bunker were frantic but organized. Runners relayed ammunition and repositioned men seamlessly. Despite fear and exhaustion, the soldiers maintained an almost mechanical rhythm. Each motion rehearsed, each action necessary. By 10:30, the attackers introduced armored vehicles attempting to force a breach. Ice-coated treads crunched over frozen ground as tanks advanced, their engines echoing against the valley walls. The gunner adjusted his artillery fire, coordinating with machine guns to channel enemy movement into kill zones. A narrow ravine funneled the tanks, making them vulnerable to explosive charges and concentrated rifle fire from prepared positions. The defenders' limited resources were stretched to the breaking point, yet every sector was covered. The bunker was no longer just concrete. It was an intricate network of lethal lines of fire, each intersecting with another, each designed to anticipate enemy movement before it occurred. As the assault intensified, the psychological weight pressed on both sides. Attackers hesitated under unseen fire, while the defenders fought in a blur of snow, smoke, and sound. At 11:15, a direct hit struck the eastern embrasure, sending debris flying and injuring 2 soldiers. Yet the gunner's foresight had accounted for structural failure. Fallback positions and alternate firing lanes ensured the sector remained defended. He personally moved to cover the gap, his calm demeanor steadying those around him. With rapid, precise commands, he orchestrated suppression fire while casualties were evacuated to the rear. The battle reached its zenith at 11:42. A concentrated Soviet infantry wave, supported by machine gun teams and an armored vehicle, converged on the bunker's western approach. For a moment, time seemed suspended, the snow falling silently, punctuated by the thunder of gunfire. The gunner triggered a coordinated barrage. Machine guns cut down the lead squads. Artillery delivered pinpoint shelling, and rifle fire created crossfire that no soldier could navigate without risk. The enemy faltered, then retreated, attempting to regroup in the open valley. Every second counted, and the gunner's 360-degree plan functioned as a living mechanism, adapting and responding to every move. By 12:15, the assault began to lose cohesion. Ammunition was dwindling, but the defenders held every sector. The attacking battalion, unable to penetrate the bunker's carefully prepared lines, began to withdraw in small groups, leaving behind casualties and equipment. Exhaustion etched deep lines into the defenders' faces, but there was a quiet satisfaction. The plan had worked. The bunker remained intact. Lives had been preserved. The immediate threat had passed. The intensity of the siege left a lasting impression on all involved. The attackers would later report confusion and frustration at the defenders' coordination, noting that concentrated resistance from such a small position defied conventional expectations. For the gunner and his men, the hours of near-constant fire, fear, and calculation crystallized into a moment of extraordinary endurance and ingenuity. The valley, scarred with tracks, footprints, and spent shells, bore witness to the effectiveness of preparation, skill, and courage under fire. As the last enemy forces receded beyond the tree line, the gunner allowed himself a rare exhale. The bunker had survived, but the toll was evident. Injuries, frostbite, and mental exhaustion weighed heavily. Supplies were low, and the threat of renewed attack loomed. Yet in that moment, the 360-degree plan had proven its worth, transforming a vulnerable position into a bastion of resilience. The defense had shifted the narrative of the battle. A single, well-prepared position had influenced the momentum of a larger front, and as the echoes of artillery faded into the winter wind, the survivors began the arduous task of tending the wounded, clearing debris and reinforcing their defenses, knowing that the fight was not over, but that they had bought themselves a critical reprieve. The snow-covered valley fell into a tense silence after the retreating enemy disappeared beyond the tree line. The bunker, though battered and scarred by artillery and gunfire, remained intact, a testament to the foresight of one man and the coordinated effort of the defenders. Casualties were significant but not catastrophic. 4 soldiers were wounded, 2 of them critically, and another had succumbed to frostbite overnight. The artillery piece and most of the small arms were functional, though ammunition was running perilously low. The defenders, exhausted, huddled inside, tending wounds, shivering beneath layers of frozen clothing, and silently acknowledging the gravity of their survival. Their sense of relief was tempered by the awareness that the Soviet battalion had not been destroyed, only delayed. Reinforcements could not be counted on immediately. The significance of the defense extended far beyond the bunker itself. Local command noted the unusual effectiveness of the resistance in their after-action reports. One officer wrote, "A single position manned with determination and foresight altered the pace of the advance. Casualties inflicted upon the enemy exceeded expectations for a garrison of this size." Military historians later analyzed the engagement as an example of how small unit ingenuity could compensate for numerical inferiority. The 360-degree defensive plan, essentially a full-circle strategy to cover all approaches, became a case study in tactical preparation under extreme conditions. It demonstrated that careful observation, anticipation of enemy movements, and disciplined execution could transform a modest fortification into a linchpin of defense. The psychological impact on both sides was profound. Among the defenders, confidence grew. The gunners' leadership, calm under fire, reinforced the value of initiative and coordination. Soldiers who had been on the verge of despair found renewed purpose. Conversely, the attacking battalion reported disorientation and frustration in their operational logs. Commanders noted the unusually high casualties for an assault against such a small position, and the difficulty of dislodging a team that had anticipated every approach. Morale among the attackers wavered. Even seasoned troops recognized that luck alone could not account for the bunker's resistance. Strategically, the delay caused by the bunker's survival had tangible consequences. The valley was a critical channel for troop movements and supplies. By holding it even temporarily, the defenders bought valuable time for adjacent units to reorganize, redistribute resources, and fortify secondary positions. The broader front was not decisively altered, but localized tactical advantages allowed for incremental shifts that could influence subsequent operations. For Soviet forces, the encounter highlighted the challenges of winter operations, the dangers of underestimating fortified positions, and the necessity of reconnaissance and combined arms coordination. For German defenders, it reinforced the value of preparation, discipline, and small unit autonomy. The defenders themselves became quiet legends among nearby units. Reports circulated of the gunners' meticulous planning and calm authority. Newcomers were instructed on the importance of covering all angles, maintaining communication, and anticipating enemy tactics. Personal accounts from soldiers who survived the siege described the moment-to-moment intensity of the fight, the deafening roar of artillery, the sudden crack of rifles, the tense silence between bursts of fire, and the uncanny feeling that every movement of the enemy had been foreseen. These narratives, though individual, converged on a single truth. Preparation and discipline could tip the balance in situations that seemed overwhelmingly dire. Materially, the bunker required repairs. Artillery strikes had cracked concrete walls, and embrasures had been partially destroyed. Soldiers worked in shifts, reinforcing vulnerable points with sandbags, scavenging timber, and compacting snow as makeshift barriers. Supplies were rationed carefully. Each round of ammunition, each ration of food, was treated as a precious resource. Despite the exhaustion, work continued without complaint, another reflection of the morale reinforced by leadership and shared survival. In the wider scope of the campaign, the encounter at the bunker became emblematic of defensive resilience. Military analysts later emphasized the importance of small, well-positioned units capable of holding key terrain. The engagement demonstrated that numerical superiority alone could not guarantee success against defenders who were prepared, motivated, and strategically positioned. The 360-degree plan, while simple in concept, showed that discipline, foresight, and situational awareness could amplify the effectiveness of limited resources. In training manuals and tactical studies following the war, variations of this approach were highlighted as essential lessons in defensive warfare. For the enemy, lessons were equally hard-earned. The difficulty of engaging a single fortified position with limited visibility, deep snow, and entrenched defenders informed subsequent operational planning. Commanders were forced to consider artillery preparation, flanking routes, and combined arms coordination more carefully. Casualty reports and after-action analyses repeatedly referenced the confusion caused by defenders who had anticipated every move, emphasizing the need for reconnaissance and adaptability in future assaults. Despite its tactical success, the bunker was still only one position in a much larger conflict. Reinforcements eventually arrived, and the garrison was rotated out after several days. Survivors returned to nearby lines, carrying both scars and a reputation for extraordinary endurance. The gunner, credited with organizing the defense, was recognized by his peers and documented in operational reports, though much of his story remained confined to oral history and the accounts of those who had endured the siege alongside him. In retrospect, the siege demonstrated the interplay of human resilience, tactical ingenuity, and the harsh realities of winter warfare. The defenders' success was not merely a matter of luck or brute strength. It was the result of careful observation, deliberate planning, and coordinated execution under conditions that tested every physical and mental limit. In the hours of intense fighting, one man's plan became the backbone of survival, shaping the outcome of a small but strategically significant engagement. The echoes of that day lingered long after the snow melted. The valley, scarred by footprints and shell craters, remained a reminder that preparation and discipline could defy overwhelming odds. The defenders, though weary and battered, had altered the course of a battle, bought time for reinforcements, and left behind lessons that would resonate in military studies for decades. The 360-degree plan had done more than keep a bunker alive. It had proven the enduring value of foresight, courage, and the unbreakable link between leadership and survival. And as the soldiers finally rested, tending to wounds and shoring up defenses, the story of the bunker became inseparable from the larger narrative of human endurance in war, leading naturally to reflection on its historical and philosophical significance. In the cold clarity of winter, the bunker stood as a quiet monument to human ingenuity and resilience. Its walls, scarred and battered, told a story not of machinery or firepower alone, but of foresight, discipline, and the unyielding will to survive. One gunner's meticulous planning, the 360-degree coverage he had envisioned, had turned a modest fortification into a formidable defensive point. He had anticipated movement before it occurred, accounted for every angle, and coordinated a response that maximized the efforts of a small, exhausted team. In doing so, he transformed the abstract principles of military science into tangible, life-saving action. The engagement reminds us that history is often shaped not solely by grand strategies or massive armies, but by the decisions of individuals acting under pressure. Small units, when guided by experience and foresight, can alter the course of larger campaigns, delay enemy advances, and influence morale across both sides of a conflict. The 360-degree plan was more than a tactical maneuver. It was a testament to adaptability under extreme conditions, showing that preparation, discipline, and leadership could amplify human potential even in the face of overwhelming odds. Equally significant is the human dimension. Soldiers in that bunker faced fear, exhaustion, and the constant presence of death. Yet through coordination, trust, and shared purpose, they endured. The psychological fortitude displayed during those hours echoes across history, reminding us that courage is often quiet, methodical, and deliberate, rather than spectacular. Moments of calm amidst chaos, decisions made with precision under pressure, and trust in a collective plan are as decisive as bullets or artillery shells. The siege also illustrates the evolving interplay of technology and human agency in warfare. Weapons, communications, and fortifications provided the tools, but it was the human mind that orchestrated them into a coherent system of survival. The effectiveness of a bunker did not lie solely in its concrete walls or its artillery pieces, but in the foresight, adaptability, and creativity that transformed these instruments into a living, responsive defense. Looking back, the story of the bunker and its defenders offers lessons beyond military tactics. It speaks to the enduring power of preparation, the importance of anticipating challenges before they arise, and the resilience of individuals and small groups when faced with overwhelming pressure. It is a reminder that even in war, the combination of intellect, courage, and coordination can create extraordinary outcomes from modest means. In the frozen silence that followed the siege, the valley bore witness to this convergence of human endurance and tactical brilliance. Time has softened the roar of guns and the crack of rifles, but the legacy remains. One gunner's foresight, one disciplined team, and a plan that turned vulnerability into strength. It is a story of survival, ingenuity, and the quiet heroism that often goes unnoticed in the sweeping narratives of history, but whose impact resonates far beyond a single battlefield. The bunker endured. The soldiers endured. And through their experience, we are reminded that history is shaped not only by the armies that march across the earth, but by the minds and hearts of those who hold the line, often alone, against the storm.